So I'm going to move on briefly to jumping up again in the food web. We're going to talk about whitefish and Cisco. Cisco is also known as lake herring. Lake whitefish are the principal species targeted by the commercial fishery on Lake Huron. This time series starts in 1900, so we're not at historic highs for lake whitefish yields in the commercial fishery, but we're coming down from recent historic peaks. And at one point we had actually surpassed our fish community objective for this particular group of species. So things have looked fairly favorable for lake whitefish since the beginning in the mid to late 1970s. Even saying that, this fishery isn't without its own challenges in the face of some of the changes in Lake Huron. Cladophora, which is the green growth on these hard substrates, is impacting the fishery for lake whitefish. It's a algal species that anchors but dies and sloughs off in wind events, and it fouls commercial fishing gear as well as our assessment gear quite badly at times. And these two shots in the lower left and right are commercial gill net straps that have been completely fouled with Cladophora. I included this slide because I did want to show that we have seen some signals with lake whitefish of some of the changes that have been occurring in the fish community in Lake Huron. This is growth or a mean weighted age through time for a variety of ages from age 3 to 10 for lake whitefish. And we've seen a fairly gradual but constant decline in growth in lake whitefish. And this is largely attributed to changes we've seen with diaporia being one of the major forage items for lake whitefish in the past. So this obviously has influence on whitefish production and recruitment when you've got fish that used to be 3 kilos at a given age that are now 1 to maybe 1.5 kilos. So moving on to sea lamprey, again, kind of climbing up the hierarchy in the food web. This is, as Dave mentioned, one of our invasive species in the first wave, species that has been implicated in the near virtual collapse of lake trout, and certainly had an impact on other large-bodied fish species over and above lake trout, caused major declines in lake whitefish, even walleye and lake sturgeon in the past. But lake trout were the species that have always borne the brunt of sea lamprey parasitism. So our target that we've set out in our fish community objectives is an upper threshold that we'd like to be underneath of 73,000 spawning adult sea lamprey. We've come down since the 80s and 90s towards that, but we haven't attained our overall abundance target for sea lamprey. We have actually seen some recent increases. This graph doesn't do the greatest job of showing those, but we have seen some recent increases within this 5-year period that this most recent State of the Lake report covers. One of our major metrics for sea lamprey is wounding rates with lake trout. We're shooting for an average of 5 wounds per 100 fish around the lake, and we've nearly been at that target. We've come up, we're kind of fluctuating between 5 and 10 wounds on a lake-wide basis. We do see wounding rates in some parts of the lake higher than 10 wounds per 100 lake trout that we sample. So
we want to mention there, Davis, what say here?
Part of the reason things have come down, and one of the areas that's received a lot of treatment activity over the last decade has been the St. Mary's River. St. Mary's River has been shown to be the largest producer of sea lamprey in the Great Lakes. It's our source of water out of Lake Superior, so we bear the brunt of all of that sea lamprey production on all of our large-bodied fish species. And there is a general gradient in wounding rates as you get closer to the St. Mary's River wounding rates go up, and wounding rates in the North Channel are still well above our target levels for lake trout. So it's receiving a lot of energy. The Great Lakes Fishery Commission works with DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to control sea lamprey. They've been trying different mechanisms to try and bring sea lamprey numbers down across the Great Lakes. Right now, they're testing some synthesized pheromones. Still, the backbone is treatment with TFM, and the approach they take now is they treat heavily back-to-back 2 years in a row on each of the Great Lakes. So we're in the midst of that 2-year hardcore heavy-duty treatment of sea lamprey in Lake Huron right now. So,
what's the lifespan on that lamprey, on the larva of the lamprey? What's in the Cimarron River?
the adults or the larvae themselves?
The larva.
They're actually quite an interesting beast. I spent a summer working for sea lamprey control. A lot of the times larvae, if they live in poor quality habitat, just live longer, they don't die. But in the St. Mary's River, it's fairly high quality habitat. I think their average larval lifespan is 2 to 3 years in the St. Mary's before they call them transformers. They spend essentially a spring-summer period transforming into the parasitic adult. And a lot of the assessment work in the St. Mary's is actually trapping those transformers as the larvae come out of the sediment and they start to migrate downriver out into the open waters of Lake Huron. But sea lamprey can live up to as much as 7 or 8 years of age as a larvae in stream before they change into an adult. And it's in the adult form, prior to sexual maturity, that they're doing their damage on large-bodied fish species. So they're swimming around, attaching to fish like salmon, trout, whitefish, and sucking body fluids out of the fish. So again, another step up in the food web. I'm going to present some information from 2 talks, both on lake trout, one from the U.S. side of the lake, the U.S. side of the main basin, and then a presentation from Ontario waters for lake trout, which includes data from all 3 basins. So it was a little difficult with some of these talks to pull out salient slides because we're talking about 2 days worth of presentation. So for the sake of lake trout, the major story with lake trout is increases in natural reproduction. So from the main basin of the lake, we've seen some really strong signals of wild fish coming on the scene essentially since alewives collapsed in 2004. So those 3 panels show results from 3 different regions of the main basin. Largely, particularly in central Lake Huron, we've seen proportions of wild fish increase quite dramatically since the early 2000s. Other change we have seen, though, that kind of complicates the situation for us when it comes to managing the situation is that lake trout, although they don't seem to have experienced the food stress that Chinook salmon did, we have seen some changes in growth. And what this graph shows is either lake trout over 533 mil fork length or all fish combined. Since around 2000, we've certainly after alewives collapsed, we've seen growth rates decline for lake trout, and we've certainly seen some impacts to abundance too. So what we're seeing now with lake trout largely is that where we used to see lake trout that were 4 or 5 years of age at a size that was catchable in our gear, whether we're doing assessments or in the commercial fishery, those fish are now ages 7 to 8 years of age when they're at a sufficient size that they can get caught in gill nets. So we've seen some fairly significant changes in growth with lake trout. So moving to the Ontario side of the lake, this was the situation in 2004 in our last state of the lake. So the pie charts depict proportions of stocked versus wild. Yellow being stocked, green being wild. So in our last state of the lake, largely where we were sampling lake trout, and this is largely from our commercial fish sampling program where we get these data, We were seeing wild fish, measurable in some cases, but you know, in most areas below 25%. Notable exception being off of Perry Sound, where we have a rehabilitated lake trout population. We're seeing spillover of wild fish out into the open waters of Georgian Bay. Contrast that with data from the current state of the lake reporting period, so from 2005 to 2010. We've seen a major increase in the number of wild lake trout sampled in our commercial fish program. And we use our data from our onboard commercial catch sampling because it gives us the best broad brush overview of what's going on with the lake, species like lake trout. In some cases, we've seen, of note, southern Main Basin, we see as much as 50% of the catch in the commercial fishery are wild fish. So we've seen, that's one of the big changes in this most recent state of the lake reporting period, the last 5 years, 6 years. Wild lake trout have really come on strong since 2004. So in terms of, I didn't display all of this data just for the sake of simplicity tonight, but I did keep some of the summary points about some graphs I didn't show. We have seen, as I said, we have seen some changes in abundance. In some areas, we've seen some declines, notable in southern Georgian Bay. That's one of our concerns with lake trout in Ontario waters. We've seen declines in abundance in southern Georgian Bay. In other places, the declines have been more moderate, or lake trout abundances are actually increasing. We have seen reduced survival of stocked fish. Largely, we've seen the population mature. Fish are older on average. Our age composition is maturing. In some areas, we're actually seeing the mean age of adult lake trout is actually older than the age to maturity. So that means we now have the average fish is old enough to actually be sexually mature and reproduce now. So that, you know, is one of those things contributing to that surge in wild recruitment. Lamprey wounding stable, but it's increased in Georgian Bay. You know, it's probably one of the factors, you know, contributing to that decline in southern Georgian Bay. And natural reproduction is certainly widespread now.